Ooh, dang.
Good afternoon, everybody. Woof, let's try that again. I know it's after lunch, but you've had your caffeine, haven't you? Good afternoon, everybody. All right, there you go. My name's Dave Burnison. I'm a senior DevOps advocate at GitHub, but before coming over to GitHub, I was at Microsoft for a number of years, and I'd become an advocate for the Azure DevOps team.
Dan Hellem, I am project manager on Azure DevOps, so responsible for Azure repos, boards, wiki, some of our AI stuff, et cetera.
All right, well, let's get right into it. We only have 45 minutes. Today, we want to talk about Azure DevOps and GitHub, your path to agentic AI. So for a long time, Azure DevOps, GitHub seen as separate platforms, but over the last few years, Dan and his team especially have been working on more and better integrations and everything. So now, integrating GitHub with Azure DevOps is your path to agentic AI. So I want to show you some of the new features, but also hopefully inspire you about how to think about using AI for Azure DevOps through GitHub. So we want to take a look and talk about where we're at today, kind of our messaging for Azure DevOps. And whether you're a small startup team or an enterprise team with thousands of developers, we want to enable you to choose the best tool chain that fits your team's workflow and your project requirements. If you're a small team with a greenfield project, GitHub may have everything that you need, including issues and projects for planning and tracking and such. But if you're one of those teams who has heavily customized Azure boards, lots of Azure pipelines, templates, you're rolling things up across team projects to kind of a portfolio level, then we want to talk about integrating Azure DevOps with GitHub, because that supercharges your teams with AI. We want to fully harness GitHub Copilot's agentic power while continuing to leverage the investments you've made in Azure boards, Azure pipelines, test plans, and more. Now, users of Azure boards and Azure pipelines can now really harness the agentic power of GitHub Copilot Cloud Agent in their work. And we know there's teams that this might not be the right time to make that migration. Maybe there's sustaining engineering projects in Azure repos that need that stability and continuity. So we'll talk about how Microsoft is continuing to invest in Azure DevOps in areas of boards and repos and pipelines and test plans. Dan's got some things I think you're really going to like there. So I am going to switch over to demo mode. And I've got a series of videos here, so we don't have to wait for Copilot necessarily. But I want to start off. Actually, let me get to, here we go. Just kind of with the basics. So I've got, my Azure DevOps environment. I'm leveraging the boards and everything here. I've got my hierarchy even showing the backlog right here on the dashboard. And you can see all that good stuff. But I want to show you the GitHub Copilot app. This is a really low barrier to entry, especially if you're a project manager that lives in Azure boards. Maybe you're not technical to where you're in Visual Studio Code every day and things like that. So let's talk about how you can use the GitHub Copilot app in your work. So if I go into the settings and under the MCP servers, we can see I've got this configured for the Azure DevOps remote MCP server. Simply plug in the server name, plug in the URL to your organization, specify what tools you want to use. In my case, I've got work items, Azure pipelines, test plans, wiki, et cetera. But my repos are in GitHub. So I'm not going to say we need the repo tools here. So I can come in here, connect this to my GitHub, connect this to my GitHub repo, and I'm going to say, well, what Azure DevOps projects can I access from here? And we'll see that it's going to say, okay, I'm going to reach out and use that MCP server, there it is, the ADO remote MCP server to do that, and show me my list of team projects. It's all right, I want to start doing some stuff with the 𝗬𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀toys. So are there any user stories or bugs recently assigned to me where the state is set to new or active in the 𝗬𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀shelter project? If so, show me those details. So there's our user stories, and the way I set up the instructions, it's even giving me a link to that user story. So right from here, I can go and take a look at the user story. Now I look through the details of this user story, and it's like, you know, I'm not sure that's really following our standards and best practices for how a user story should be set up. Well, when we did this session for Ignite last fall, Dan had set up a wiki with defining what's a good epic, what's a good feature, you know, what's a good user story. I wonder if we could take that and turn that into agents and custom instructions that Copilot could use, so that we could then come back to Copilot and say, hey, help me refine my user stories and everything. So we'll see that here in a little bit. Also, Azure pipelines. What's the status of our pipelines runs? So we can take a look and see right from here, we've got a couple of different pipeline runs, or a couple of different pipelines, PR checks and a build and deploy pipeline, and we can see they're currently succeeding. So yeah, you can access many different things from within Azure DevOps through the MCP server. So there, we can go right to the details there and see we're connected up to our 𝗬𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀shelter repo and see the last commit, even jump into the last PR and everything right from there if we wanted to. All right, I think that's, yeah, and then seeing our unit tests, results, and everything from here as well. Now moving on, I want to talk about converting those wiki pages into Copilot instructions and Copilot agents. So I went back to the Copilot app. Whoops, get past my prompt, come on. So there's our wiki pages with all that information. We even have sample markdown for what it should look like, since we're keeping everything in markdown. So now if I go over to the Copilot app, here we go. Do we have any information in the Azure DevOps that would make for a good Copilot custom agent or a good skill? Let it think and noodle on that a little bit, and it comes back and says, yeah, we've got these wiki pages out here. I'm like, all right, let's start out, create a user story on this, and set the user story's title to convert wiki contents into Copilot agents. And then I said, create a pull request for this user story. So the agent's going to go off and do all of that work. And we see it comes back and it creates a backlog manager custom agent and a set of work item quality custom instructions. And as you probably know, those instructions are just markdown files. So here's our backlog manager agent, right? It pulled all that information from the wiki, created that custom agent for us, and similarly, the custom instructions file here as well. All right, skip ahead. So next, we've got a user story for this dog adoption website. It started out very basic. You know, you can see different dogs to pick from, but we want to be able to filter it by breed. And we're going to have the Copilot Cloud Agent actually do the work for us. But first, we're going to use the Copilot app to help us refine that basic user story that's out there. So I ask for, you know, any user stories assigned to me. Anything new there? Let's skip ahead here to the good parts. So there it found the user story, 42. Here's the details. And then I said, hey, does this user story follow our standards? It came back and said, no, there's a lot of areas where it doesn't have, good acceptance criteria and everything else. So I said, use that backlog manager agent to help me refine this work item. And then we see skip ahead, and there we can see all the changes that it made to refine that backlog work item. And then next, we're going to go into the work item itself. And if I look at the history, we can see exactly all the changes that it made. So, some pretty significant updates there. Now I want to say, all right, let's take that user story and assign it to Copilot to do the work for us. And here, whoops, when we go in and select our agent, you can see there's that backlog agent right there, but I've also got agents for Bicep and Azure pipelines and other things. So here we go. Here's the work that the agent did. So you're probably familiar with this, but one of the things I want to highlight here, another benefit of moving code over to GitHub, if I dive into that session and scroll down a ways here, it's going to check the changes with Copilot Code Review and CodeQL, the security scanning tools. And you can see, based on the code review comments, there's a couple of updates that it's making there. So if we scroll down, then there's the evidence of running the security scans. Luckily, found no scan there. But the idea is we want to make sure the code that the agents are writing for you is as secure as possible. And you don't have to have licenses for CodeQL to have CodeQL run on the code that the agents are generating. And then we saw the diffs there. Then I went in, pulled this up in a code space, and said, okay, let me test this out. Let me just run this locally within this code space and see what that breed filter looks like. There we go. So now we can select by, breed, American Staffordshire Terrier, and see that that's exactly what, and that's a good start. We've got other refinements we want to make, but that's good enough for now. All right, so now the next thing, and I think this is really cool. This is really a great way to connect Azure DevOps and GitHub together with security campaigns. So one of the things with GitHub Advanced Security is we can go in and create a campaign. If I go up to my organization level, we can see we've got a number of campaigns here, and I've got one specifically for Tailspin Shelter where I said, show me all the critical and high alerts, and let's set a deadline of Monday, June 15th there in the middle. Whoops. Got too fat. There we go. And look, both of those alerts could be fixed by Copilot Autofix. And we'll see that here in a little bit. But I'm going to go back now to the Copilot app and say, are there security campaigns that include this repo? Shows me all the security campaigns, highlights that one specific to this repo. Now, make sure that's paused. All right, so for security campaign 14, create an Azure Boards feature. Create a user story for each of those alerts and link those campaigns and alerts right into my work items so that I can track them where I'm tracking all of my other project work, right? And having links right back to them. I think this is a pretty powerful way to connect Azure Boards and GitHub. So now if we look at the results, there's our new feature, our 2 user stories. And then if I go, and then also making sure that the work items are assigned the same way the alerts are assigned in Azure or in the security campaigns. So I think next I go over to Azure Boards itself. And yeah, we can see those items now in our backlog. And if I dig into that feature, there you can see the link right there to the security campaign. And if we keep going through there, there's our security campaign. I go into this guy, And we can see when we look at the details, it was assigned to me, but I could assign it right to Copilot here if I wanted to. Now, you can see there was an auto fix here, right? And this wasn't just a simple one-line change. There was a few lines that needed to be changed to fix this. So able to really deal with some more sophisticated changes and everything. What else did I show in this one? I think that was it for that one. All right. So the next one, Copilot CLI. So when you configure the GitHub Copilot app locally, that configuration is also valid for the CLI as well. So now as a developer, I can go into the CLI and see, my MCP configuration here, and it's that same ADO remote MCP. And now I can start querying about, what's in Azure DevOps and what's in GitHub. So as soon as that prompt comes up, come on. Yeah, what does the code in this repo do? What's the tech stack? So query that code, and it gives me a really nice summary here. But it also says, yeah, here's a summary of the code, but hey, we're using Azure pipelines for CI/CD. We're using Azure boards for project management. And then I can go through and say, yeah, show me what are the active or resolved user stories that are assigned to me. And there's the one, there we go. Filter pet listings by breed using a multi-select dropdown. So now I'm going to say, what's the status of this? And notice I didn't have to say AB42 or whatever. I just said status of the filter by breed user story in the related code. And then it shows me, hey, here's your pull request right here. It's waiting for you to merge it so that it can go and get deployed to production and everything. So even from the command line, we can bring together Azure DevOps and GitHub. All right, and with that, some other things I could show, but I want to give Dan plenty of time.
You're out of time.
To talk about stuff. So.
Good?
Yep.
All right.
All good.
So we've missed a couple things here. I just want to reiterate.
Oh, yeah.
Get this thing going faster. MCP server. So is everybody familiar with MCP server, I assume, by now? We have 2 MCP servers now in Azure DevOps. We have a local. We have a remote. I'll talk about why we still have 2 here in a minute. Both of them are set up. They have all basically the same tools for work items, repos, wiki, test plans, et cetera. It has all the same stuff. The Platinum experience is really if you're driving this out of VS Code and GitHub Copilot, it works super well. And then in remote, we've also consolidated a bunch of tools. It now supports service principals, managed identities. You can actually go ahead and create an agent in Foundry. We're in part of that catalog. And then we're working on right now, when I say working on, it's been several months, getting to work with Copilot Studio. And so that's stuff that we are working on now, and we're hoping that's something to be coming out in the next few weeks. The reason we have 2 is we had to build our remote MCP server on Entra, and Entra has a bunch of restrictions on what you can and cannot do with other clients. So if you try to pull up Claude and use our remote MCP server, it's not going to work right now, right? If you try to do it with Cursor or Codex, it won't work. And so we're working with Entra to try to get around those. So that's why we're going to keep local up until that happens. So that's our MCP server. And I'm going to skip through all of this stuff.
Yep, I've got slides in there that have got URLs to go dive in to learn more about it. So yeah, when you download the deck after the session, you can get to all that information, dive in, learn more.
All right, so Dave was just kind of showing, hey, if your repos have been migrated over into Azure repos, GitHub, what's that whole story look like? And so we spent a lot of investment over the last couple of years of just making sure that, when you move your repos over, you're probably going to be staying in boards, you're probably going to be staying in pipelines, you're probably going to stay in test plans, and we want to make sure that integration's awesome. So a lot of this stuff, it's not new, right? It shouldn't come to any surprise to anybody, but we spent a bunch of time investing in that space, right? Making sure that you have full traceability between your work items and GitHub commits and pull requests and branches and that kind of thing. We've also spent a lot of time on scale improvements. So we originally set it up where you could have about 500 repos connected to a project per connection. We're now at 2,000. And so we had to do that because more and more bigger organizations started coming into the product, started moving their repos over into GitHub, and started increasing the demand there. This is one that's we're going to continue to work on. It's probably going to be something that we have to work on forever. I'll give you an example. We had a customer today who wanted to connect 30,000 repos to a particular project. If you think that's crazy, we had a customer from last week who have 80,000 repos they want to connect to a project. That's 1.5 repo per every person in the company. So that's a lot of repos that they had sitting out there that they want to connect. So this is a challenge that we're going to have to continue to deal with on a regular basis, and we're going to continue to make that improvement over time. And of course, if you're using the integration, you can obviously open your pipeline up and connect it to the repo that you move, so you don't really have to change your pipelines around. We've added the ability, or added the licensing, or improved the licensing friction. So if you purchase a GitHub Enterprise license, you automatically get a basic license for free. Well, not for free, for part of that purchase. And then GitHub Enterprise Cloud with data residency is something that GitHub came out with about 2 years ago now, I think.
Something like that.
Year and a half.
Yeah.
And so all the things that we talked about, like the integration and the scale improvements, that was all included as well. Now, Dave showed the work item integration with the Copilot Cloud Agent. We did make some improvements to that. I just want to show those real quick. So obviously, you can create your own agent, like Dave showed, and you can pick your own agent, which you can kind of see here down at the bottom when you pick that. We also have the ability now to pick your own model, right? So certain models work better in certain repos, depending on your agent, depends on the instructions, depends on how much you want to pay. So now this is actually a feature that we're rolling out as we speak, which allows you to pick the model to figure out what works for you. And of course, this is all sticky, so once you select it once, it'll work again for the next time and the next time after that. All right. I'm going super fast. I'm just worried about time. All right, so the next challenge then is if you are in Azure, if you are in, oh, I got to switch the slides.
Yeah, switch slides. Yep. There you go.
If you move your repos over, or if you're about to move your repos over to GitHub, right, and you have hundreds, if not thousands of repos in Azure repos, your next biggest challenge is migrating those, right? And so we are actually coming up with a tool now that is in public preview. And we'll show you how to get signed up here in a minute. But this basically is what we call Enterprise Live Migrator. This is a full fidelity, moves your repo, moves everything about it over, right? It's bringing all the pull requests, it's bringing all the commits, it's bringing the entire history over. It's basically a seamless cutover. So what it does is when you go ahead and do the migration, there's no basically downtime, right? There's like a 30-minute downtime. We've had some customers that have some very, very big repos that they've tried to migrate over. They've used the GitHub Enterprise Importer, that's what it's called, right?
Yep.
And they've actually had downtime, they're gonna have downtime of 4 to 5 days, right? And that's obviously not acceptable for most customers. So an Enterprise Live Migrator does that whole seamless migration, low downtime. It also connects up your pipelines. So when you move the repo over, it'll connect your pipeline up. It also connects your boards up, right? So you don't have to do all that stuff as extra steps. So I'm going to show, I got a quick video here. Let's see, now I got to switch again, yeah?
Yep.
Keep forgetting to do that. On how this works. So here I have a repo in Azure DevOps, and I want to go ahead and migrate this thing over. So I'm going to go in, and I want to migrate it over into a GitHub Enterprise Cloud with data residency. And so I'm going to, sorry, let's get rid of that. There we go. There we go. So the first thing I'm going to go do, so before I start there, actually, right now I'm going to show you how this works in the CLI. And the only reason it's in the CLI now is because we just didn't have time to get the UX all done. But I'll show you some screens in the UX. Those will be part of the preview as well once we open that up. And also the commands that you're seeing here, we also have included in our MCP server. So you can have a kind of an agent to help you with that process as well. So here I have, come on, there we go. So the first thing I need to go do is create the migration, right? So I'm calling the CLI, create the migration. I'm going to, here's the organization, here's a repository, here's where I need it to go. I'm putting in some information about myself, the user ID, the agent pool, et cetera. And the first thing it does is it queues it up, right? That's what we need to go do. So it kind of queues it up. And then as soon as it gets in the queue, I'm going to use a status, right? So I'm going to check the status on a regular basis, right? Because it kind of just takes a little bit of time. So the first thing it does is goes out and does a bunch of validation. Validation is just really checking for certain file size, push packs, that type of thing, just to make sure it's legit and you can go ahead and migrate it over. And if it doesn't, it'll let you know what the problems are. Once we go through validation, which is usually rather quick, we'll do another status, and we'll go ahead and we do what's synchronization. Synchronization is a process of copying everything over, right? It's going to copy all the files over. It's going to copy the whole repo over, the entire history, all that kind of thing. This could take hours. This could take days. But that's fine because ADO, you can still like do work on the repo and ADO as you're doing the synchronization. And so as I do the synchronization, I can continue to work with it. And eventually, the synchronization is kind of complete, and it's kind of like all caught up, right? And we'll continue to synchronize that on a regular basis. I think it's every few hours to make sure it's always up to date. And at some point, you get ready for cutover, right? So you've migrated it all over. It's all synchronized up. And now I want to go and say, yep, OK, I'm ready to cut this thing over. So I'll go ahead, basically set my cutover. I'm basically saying, here's the org, and here's the repository, and here's the date that I want to cut this over, kind of scheduling it. It'll go ahead and schedule it. It'll kick in. You can now see the status where it's going through the cutover process. At this point is where the repo is basically set to read-only mode, right? I am in read-only mode. You can no longer basically work on the repo inside of Azure DevOps. The cutover is, again, roughly like 20 to 30 minutes, and then it'll complete the migration. And then as it's in cutover mode, again, I'm just going to check the status again, and eventually, once that cutover mode is completed, it marks it as migrated. And here I'll just kind of show quickly that I'll go into now Azure, or inside GitHub. You can see the repo came over. You can see that it has all the pull requests in there. It'll have all the branches in there. It has the entire history, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So again, I'll talk a little bit here in a second about how to get access to this. But that's enterprise live migrations. Feel free to clap if you need to. That's good. Oh, I'm getting all my stuff confused here. I'm talking so fast. OK, so that's enterprise live migrations. This isn't working here, Dave.
Oh, that's because, there you go. Now I should be good.
OK.
There.
So here's some of the UX as well. I forgot to mention that. So pretty straightforward, right? There's an extra page you can kind of see over on the left side there for migrating to GitHub. You can see, kind of the status of your different repos that you have, what's going on with them, what's been migrated, what's in synchronization phase, what's in cutover phase, et cetera, et cetera. If there's any errors in there, it'll let you know. And then just like I did in the CLI, I could basically queue up some repos that I want to migrate over, put in the information that I want to put in there, and go ahead and start the migration. So it's a nice UX all around that as well. All right, so for those customers that aren't moving their repos over or haven't moved their repos over yet or are going to stay in Azure DevOps, there's obviously a variety of reasons why people stay in Azure DevOps, right? It's, if we take a look at the data, we have about 2.8 million repos that are active inside of Azure DevOps. Not all these folks are going to be able to move in the short term, and it's going to take people time. It's going to take people time to, whether it's compliance reasons, whether it's just tooling reasons, et cetera. It's going to take people time to basically move those things over. And our job is to basically, what we want to do is we want to make sure that people that are staying in Azure repos are happy, right? And so the idea is to bring some of these Copilot features into Azure DevOps to kind of keep people where they're at. The last thing we want you to go do is start looking at other tools and that kind of thing to get out of the Microsoft and GitHub ecosystem. So therefore, we want to bring some of these things to you. So now, another nice announcement here is we kind of announced this yesterday on the blog post, but we're going to bring Copilot code reviews for Azure repos. And what this is it brings you the power of GitHub Copilot code reviews, where you don't need to have a Copilot license. You don't even have to have a GitHub account, right, whatsoever, right? It just magically kind of works on the back end. And what it does is and obviously your code needs to be in Azure repos for this. And as you use it, you get billed to your Azure subscription, okay? And so I'll go through a demo here real quick on how this works, and then I'll talk about those last two items on the bottom.
And when you say Azure repos, you're talking about Azure Git repos, right?
That's right. It
Yep.
does not work with TFVC.
Yep.
So no plans to make it work with TFVC. Am I on the right one?
Yep.
Yep. All right. All right. So here I have a couple pull requests that I want to go. I'm going to play with. I'm going to show some of these things are kind of in the middle of what I'm doing here because it does take a little bit of time for the Copilot to go run and report back. But here you can see I have a, let's see, not started. That's the one I want. So here I have a pull request. Looks like a normal pull request. What I'm going to go do now is I'm going to turn on the feature, and you kind of see the differences. So I'm going to go into my manage repos. And I'm going to come into this guy here and go down to settings. And down here on settings, you should be able to see enable Copilot code review for pull requests on this repo. Right now, we have basically two levels of control. We're likely going to put in a third one. First one is at the organization level, which basically says people inside my organization can use Copilot code reviews. And then we have to flip it on at the repo level. Well, what the concern here is if you're a big organization and you have lots and lots of repos, the last thing you want to do is turn it on all of them. People start running code reviews, and you get a monster bill at the end of the month type thing. And so we're allowing you to kind of control this, especially during the preview phase. So here I'm going to go flip it on. And then I'm going to go back to my pull requests. And here I'm going to open up that pull request. And you should see here now that I have a GitHub Copilot code review that I can request. So it's not a very complicated pull request. It's just some very simple changes, mostly TypeScript type stuff. I'm just adding some things to it. Here I'm going to go into my overview and I'll go ahead and hit request. So the way the code reviews work is it essentially spins up a dynamic pipeline in the background. That dynamic pipeline in the background does a shallow clone. Once it does a shallow clone, it gets also the diffs and sends that basically in a nice little type package to Copilot. Copilot then reviews all that stuff, comes back with a bunch of suggestions, and we append those suggestions to the PR. So rather than watching that work, I'm going to go show real quick one that's already been done, this one here. So here, if I open it up, I can see that I have multiple changes, or multiple suggestions. So here I have a critical bug. It's giving me basically suggestion changes here. This is basically everything you would expect for a coding agent to do for a code review. Here I have, again, another bug with multiple suggestions. And within the interface, I can come in here and apply changes, et cetera. So I can go ahead and make these changes, apply them, commit them, do a full commit, and then I can come back in here and re-request, right? And I can kind of go through that loop process. So this brings the power of those Copilot code review into Azure repos, gives you the full flexibility of doing the code reviews. There's some things that we haven't finished yet that I just want to talk about real quick, is Copilot instructions. So this is kind of like a generic Copilot, right? Like it's nothing, it doesn't adhere to Copilot instructions. So if you have a bunch of instructions that are sitting in your repo, we don't really care about them at the moment. This is going to change. This is one of the things that we're going to do before it goes GA. The other thing on the bottom there is it doesn't necessarily take into account very well previous suggestions. So I've ran into interesting loops where I made a suggestion, I fixed it, and comes back and resuggests something different on the same line of code. And so adding suggestions as context from previous, basically, code review runs will be added to help make it better decisions for you, okay? So I'm actually curious, is this interesting to people, bringing this into the product? Okay, all right, good.
Awesome.
Good, good.
Awesome.
One thing I just would like to show real quick, so this, like I said, I keep forgetting to switch, sorry. Is we do have agent pools, is where basically we're tracking this at. So when you are signed up for the preview, and again, I'll show that in a second on how to get signed up, and you want to take a look at like what's happening and what's running, or something fails, you can come into agent pools, Azure pipelines, and you can see those runs that are happening. So you can see that there's one happening right now. That's a different one. Let's see if I can find one real quick from yesterday. These are all the code review. There we go. We are planning on improving this kind of interface a little bit to make it a little bit easier to kind of find these and see these. Obviously, it doesn't look pretty. It's just a bunch of JSON. But you can kind of see the whole event and the run that it takes to go do that. OK? All right, so let's go to, and next thing we want to do. The other thing that we're bringing to kind of AI is Copilot Autofix for GitHub Advanced Security. So if you're a Gazdo user, we're bringing the ability to just auto-fix issues that pop up. So I'll show that one here real quick as well. So I'm going to go back. Oh, sorry, I forgot to talk about billing. That's more important. Actually, let's talk about that real quick.
Anybody care about billing?
So this bill to your Azure subscription, okay? So that's how this works. And so if I come into my subscription, come down to cost management, do cost analysis, I can come in here now and see this at the daily rate, basically, of how much it costs me per day to run this thing. And you can actually break it. So here you can see, I had a lot of runs ran back on the 14th. But you can kind of break it down per run. And some of these runs are, super cheap. It's literally a couple cents per day per run. Sometimes it's a little bit more. It obviously just depends on the complexity of your pull request and the size of the pull request and what kind of reasoning has to happen there. Another thing you can do here, too, is I can come down and look at my resources. If I look at resources, I can see how it's basically broken down per organization. So this is my organization. Here you can see that I have basically the meter, which is my AI credit for ASDO. Here's the product, and then basically here how much it costs. This cost me 0.5 cents this month, which is not a whole lot. Let's do last 30 days. Give you a better idea of how much it costs, over a period of time. So again, we're suggesting that when you start this out, billing will be part of the preview, so you don't get these for free. You can start using them. The suggestion is just start slow, right? Start with a few repos, see how much cost you're acquiring, see how it works for you, that type of thing. Make sure it gives you the value that you need, and help you better understand the pricing limits. We'll save the questions for the end. All right, so that's that one. Now we'll talk about the GASDO stuff. So I don't know why I did that. To switch back. Let's go down to advanced security. So in advanced security, let's grab the right one. So here I have CodeQL scans basically running on this particular repo. You can see it's found a bunch of issues already for me. Here, if I open up what are the issues that I found, typically, how would you fix this, right? It basically, right now, comes up and says, hey, we got a problem. Here's what the severity is. Here's what we think we found. You got some SQL injection issues here. Here's a description of it, recommendation. I'd have to open this up in VS Code, go make my code change, do a pull request, that type of thing. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to go flip this one on as well. So we're going to go down to Manage Repositories. And we'll go into our vulnerable repo, in our code scanning, our code security plan. And you can see here there's another option called AutoFix. Okay? AutoFix, we'll just go ahead and enable that. And we'll come back to advanced security. And now you can see I have a generate fix up on the top right. So this is very much like Copilot code reviews. It'll spins up a dynamic pipeline in the background, goes ahead and takes the things that you want me to go change, goes ahead and changes them, creates a PR, et cetera. So here, I'm going to go do fix in progress. These ones take a little bit longer. It takes like 3 to 4 or 5 minutes sometimes to complete the fix. So I'm going to show another one that I used to have or did already. So here, basically, I've gone in, made the code change. You can see the related pull request. I can open up the pull request, take a look at that, see what it is, et cetera. So that's Copilot code reviews. Let me talk about a couple things with that real quick. So obviously, it's bringing the power of GitHub Copilot AutoFix to GASDO customers. We're starting with just CodeQL alerts right now. The idea is eventually to expand all scanning alerts, especially you can even bring your own third-party tools. And the idea is just to make it faster for you to go ahead and do this, right? Faster to fix issues that pop up. We're also going to be adding AutoFix to security campaigns. So security campaigns is something that was part of GASDO. We released that just a couple of sprints ago. We'll bring that ability to do AutoFix to security campaigns as well. Okay? What do we got? 7 minutes left. All right, so here's the technical preview. So we have 3 of these. We did a blog post earlier today, yesterday. We'll have another blog post that'll come out on these individual ones, so you can certainly sign up. You can see the sign up link on the bottom. The idea is we're just taking your organization name, take a little bit of your email, and we'll go ahead and get you signed up. We'll send you an email when we're ready. We're expanding or rolling these out over a period of time, right? So we'll have a wave of people. We'll turn it on. We'll kind of see how it goes. We'll add another wave of people, et cetera, et cetera. But you'll certainly get an email from one of us on the product team. Once you sign up, we'll let you know when it's ready type thing to take a look at. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, so another one we just kind of like to mention before we kind of wrap things up is Microsoft is kind of practicing what we preach, so to speak. So we have a bunch of internal teams right now migrating their repos over to GitHub. And we have a bunch of folks actually actively working inside of GitHub. So the migration path was a big thing that spurred ELM, right? To be able to make it easier for people to migrate their repos over into GitHub. So this is kind of, AI is a forcing function for us internally, just like it is probably for all of you, is like getting more AI and doing more. So we have a bunch of, again, there's some repos that we can do inside of Azure, inside of Microsoft that can be easily moved, and there's some that are not so much. And so we're kind of in the same boat as everybody else is. Some of these folks are going to move over, some are not going to, and they're going to stay in Azure repos. But this gives you an idea of we're also dogfooding it as well. We're seeing how it works. We're adding tools to make it easier for us internally, as well for folks externally.
And this is not all of Microsoft, right? This is one slice, just that Copilot agents and platform.
Yeah, this is a very small part of the organization at the moment.
So yeah, there's others that are making the move as well.
Yeah. And but it's just getting started.
Yep.
On our side. Yep. All right, Dave, you want to talk about this stuff, or I can talk about this one? I guess,
yeah.
Quick. So this is the blog post that we did as well. Basically, it says all the things that we just talked about. You know, includes just kind of our overall strategy, but also includes sign up and information on how to get hooked up for ELM, how to get hooked up for Copilot code reviews, and the Gazdo autofix stuff.
And where there's links available, the blog post got links to the documentation for the new features and things as well. So yeah, you can really dive in and learn a lot more there.
I don't know what else you want to say.
Yeah. So, everybody preparing build, set up these repos and stuff. So yeah, we went out and put a lot of resources here at the repo that we created, and so here you've got link to the blog post with some of the key information there. We talk about the things that we showed, but lots of other resources for you to dive in and learn more. Also reference the big GitHub blog post yesterday that talked about the Copilot apps, sandboxes, and all those other things, direct link to the enterprise live migrations. One thing I want to point out here, I covered a lot of information in a short time, but on this repo is a release that contains all of my demo videos, and there's even a couple there that I didn't cover. Maybe I'll have a minute to go through one or two more of those. But yeah, you can get all of the resources here, and the slides will be made available as well. Should I go ahead and? I know there's one I can show here. Should I go back to that?
It's up to you, Dave.
All right.
I can also show how to add MCP server to Foundry.
All right. Well, this one will just take a minute. So if I skip ahead here, the one I want to show though is even using Copilot, the AI in Copilot to work on the metadata of our team projects, right? Sprint schedule, doing that the old-fashioned way. Yeah, you could go through the APIs and do that and everything. But I set up first a user story so that that was my prompt for Copilot. And then I went over to there we go. I go to the GitHub Copilot app, and I said, okay, yeah, let's look at what user stories are out there. Okay, there's user story number 3. Create sprint schedule, and I just said, hey, Copilot, go do the work for user story number 3. Pretty straightforward because I had everything that I wanted for the prompt in that user story. So it went off and did all of that work, created all, 56 sprints that I wanted here for the next 2 fiscal years, and I come back into Azure DevOps, into the project configuration, and I can see all that did. And so I was able to do that in just a few minutes rather than point, click, to repeatedly set all of those up. Right.
We won't have time to do mine, but
okay.
I do want to, one more thing that we wanted, is this one?
Yep.
Is we do have, I don't know much about this feature as much as I probably should, but one of the new releases that we put in the blog post is the ability to do the Apple Max for pay per minute billing. Is also included for sign up as well. So we have now the capability so customers can basically have been waiting for to do Microsoft hosted agents in Azure pipelines that are pay per minute billing basically. So cool.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
We'll be over at Ship and Tell in the other pavilion around 3 o'clock. So that'll be a great time to stop by and ask questions.